That's great. I mean, you've set out quite vividly there the kind of changes that we've seen in the industry over the last few years. And I think at one stage in that last piece you mentioned the kind of last 10 years. And that coincides with or corresponds to the period of the Rethinking Construction Agenda and the Egan Agenda. To what extent is the Egan Agenda part of this change, or how influential do you think the Egan Agenda has been in the nature of the changes that you've set out, or maybe were we in a period of extensive change anyway? Right. How influential has the Rethinking Construction and the Egan Agenda been, in your view?
It's an interesting and quite tricky question to answer. I think if you now went to, let's say, somebody who'd been in the industry for the past 5 or 6 years, and you ask them the question, how's the Egan Agenda affected the way you work? They go, what? But that isn't to say that actually the way in which they do things haven't changed profoundly. Whether you can isolate Egan and Latham from lots of other changes, I suspect would be a bit different. But the fact that the industry does feel different to the industry that I entered in 1988 is a tribute to certainly somebody somewhere has taken a view that we have to do things in a different way. That said, I think an awful lot of changes were already in play before Egan came away, and that consolidation piece, I think, is one of them. But if one takes some of the principles that Egan was talking about, we could, talking about a bit of a balanced scorecard, to use management speak, you can actually start to see that some of those things, you can feel that, yes, actually I can respond to that, I can see that. So if one thinks about the principle of collaborative working, government has taken a leading role here because it has changed the way in which it procures. So its preferred route is to go down a prime contractor route or a PFI route, and those almost by definition imply some form of collaborative working between the design side and the supply side. So integrated solutions come out. If one thinks about the principle of partnering a supply chain, it's unthinkable to suggest that you would go out to tender without having discussed quite a lot of the project in detail with the people who are likely to do it. So if one thinks of a lot of the major components of buildings these days, the cladding systems, the environmental control systems, the design of those is a collaborative endeavour which involves some exchange of design responsibility at a point between somebody having the idea and the completion of construction. And I think another key area is just in terms of customer focus, which is probably one of the great principles that somebody coming out of the car industry would have. Customer is king. And if one thinks about the nature of the buildings that are produced now, the quality of design, the degree of attention to what the end user is requiring, I think there's been a sea change there. And I suspect that the schools programme, assuming that it delivers the promise that it is expected to deliver, will be an exemplar of that, because you've got buildings that are being asked to respond to the way in which education is delivered now and will be delivered in the future. So I think that is also a major sea change. If I think there's two areas where I wouldn't say there's a open verdict, but it's interesting to think about where we sit on this. One was that sense of leadership, and for an industry that will forever be fragmented, and I think there's no reason to think why it should not be fragmented, then leadership will always be unclear. So you will find clients who will take a leadership initiative, you will find parts of the industry which will take a leadership initiative either by setting standards or by example. And that, in terms of thinking, is that embedded in an industry in a different way to how it was 20 years ago, say for example when Frank Lampel would have been doing great things with Bovis? I suspect probably not, actually. It's still very dependent on individuals who have the drive to make things happen. And finally, it's a question about people. And no doubt one thinks about the industry, its makeup now, to where it was. The diversity of people in industry has increased enormously. Now, whether that has actually been a get-out-of-jail-free card for an industry which was expected to commit to greater investment in training, greater investment in systems, where effectively you can get a lot of very willing people from other parts of Europe, I suspect we might find on that area that we haven't done as much as we should have done. And as we look forward to an industry in 2 or 3 years' time, when a lot of that sort of migrant labour has gone home, and think about the level of investment in skills for the next generation, I think we'll find that actually has been an area where it was almost, it was forgotten in the rush to deliver all the work we've been doing over the past 10 years.